Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode with George Franklin, actually. So today, Athletes USA and myself, we've decided to do something a little bit different to the usual interviews that we have with some of our fellow student athletes going over to the US. And actually, we've decided to have an interview with George, who is a sports psychologist working with some of our athletes who are actually heading to the US and some who are still in the process of recruitment and trying to head over. So different athletes that he's working with, and he's been a real invaluable support for those athletes. And I wanted him to give everyone who doesn't really know much about sports psychology a little bit of an insight into how this can help you as an athlete, but also as a person. So without further ado, George, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm not bad, mate. Yourself?
Yes, very good, thanks. So shall we get started straight away?
Yeah, of course. So a little bit about me. I am a trainee sport and exercise psychologist, like Fab just mentioned then, currently studying at the University of Portsmouth. So that basically means half my time is working with some of the athletes, Athlete USA, and any other athletes who want to get in touch with me to learn a bit more about sports psychology. Mm-hmm. And the rest of my time is looking at research. So I've done research looking at gymnastics, moving over to the US. And at the moment, I'm looking at a concept called organizational thriving. So that's how elite sport organizations, clubs, NCAA organizations and teams, how they can best work to thrive and develop a sustained high level of performance and well-being. So that's just a little bit of what I do at the moment. But I think mostly today we'll talk about the applied side of things and how I work with athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. So dive in really is into what sports psychology can do for an athlete and what it is. So let's just start really with the basics. So just tell everyone who doesn't know, what is sports psychology?
Well, as you know, a lot of the athletes I work with are between the ages of 16 to 18 and just getting onto this course. This route from going over to the US. So I do like to keep it simple the way I explain sports psychology, and the most useful way and the most useful definition I've sort of found for explaining what sports psychology is it's a way of an athlete better understanding their own thought processes and then understanding the behaviors that follow those thought processes. So for example, if there's an athlete in any sport who's maybe got fluctuating confidence levels during their season, my job as a sports psychologist would be to work with them and sort of figure out what the thought processes that they're having or going through, which are affecting their confidence specifically. And this can range from a variety of things, including things outside the environment, such as the crowd, the opponents, their relationship with the coach or their teammates, or even, and often the case is that things outside of the athletic domain in general can be affecting their performance. So maybe that's if they're struggling with their education or with work issues or anything like that. There's so many factors that can sort of play in these thought processes that we talk about affecting their performance.
Absolutely. I think that's something that is so important for every athlete to understand, is that yes, the physical side, the technical side are really important elements to your performance. The mental side, in my experience, has always been the one thing that is hardest to figure out first and foremost, because it's not like you can just go to the gym and you'll just all of a sudden improve your mindset. It's something that's constant as well, that you have to work on and develop. And it's always like almost going to a mind gym per se, working on mindfulness and different techniques. So tell us, what are some of those techniques, not to put you on the spot because we didn't sort of practice this question, but what sort of techniques can an athlete use, or what do you use with the athletes that you work with?
Well, you mentioned one of them there with, as you know, some of the athletes I work with, what they'll tell you straight away is something I really like to incorporate in the work I do is mindfulness. So as you mentioned there, and that is sort of helping athletes stay in the present moment, sort of accepting the emotions that they feel, not in a positive or a negative way, just sort of accepting them and moving on. And basically that enables them to have as much concentration and as much focus on the task at hand. Mm-hmm. So, and then there's a variety of other things which are fairly generic, which a lot of athletes like to sort of work with sports psychologists from the beginning, including confidence levels, motivation, arousal regulation for when it's a big game, and a big one is mental toughness as well. So how can an athlete become more resilient, battle against adversity, and just sort of stay at their optimal level of performance for as long as they possibly can?
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. And you did quite an extensive piece of research as well for gymnasts going to the US, as you said earlier, George. What were your findings there?
Well, this research is currently in press, but I can talk to you about the main findings we sort of found. And going back a bit to what I said earlier, one of the major sort of the novel finding we found was a lot of the issues, or maybe the barriers to overcome for these gymnasts going over to America, did not involve sport at all, really. They were sort of things outside the athletic domain, which can be specific to a lot of maybe the athletes Athlete USA works with, specifically the international student athletes that are going over there. So that can include adapting to the culture over in America, adapting to the style of playing, the philosophy, because I think we're both from Britain, we sort of know that America has a bit more of a win at all cost attitude to sport in comparison to maybe Europe and Great Britain and other areas of the world. There are so many sort of ones outside of sport as well as inside of sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that we really understand here as well at Athletes USA is the fact that we are all our own person, first and foremost, and going halfway across the the Atlantic Ocean over to the US is very, very difficult from a cultural perspective, first and foremost, not even to say the performance side of aspects, because if you say, for example, football, it's a completely different style of play. So you have to adapt. And as a person as well, this is where the sports psychology of things can really come into it, because if you have a good understanding of who you are as a person, then you can be flexible and adaptable to those different situations. And I think that's one of the biggest things for young athletes, any 18, 19 or 20-year-old going over to America is, to be aware of that challenge, because it's something that will probably affect most at some point, but it's how you overcome that. So in your experience, how would you, or what tips would you give to an athlete for them to overcome that challenge of culture, of personality, maybe differences, performance, those sorts of elements? How would you say they could deal with that in a better way?
I think if there's be one take-home message from this short interview we're having today, I would say that the main sort of mindset change or sort of thought process that athletes could work on or constantly remind themselves of to, as you said there, ensure that they become adaptable to this route and this change, especially going over to America, would be to sort of change their mindset from seeing all of these obstacles and these different transitions as threats and look at them more as challenges. And that's easier said than done. I think as humans, we're sort of naturally programmed to instantly see things as threat if we go back to the dawn of time. But one of the things that I definitely think all the greatest athletes, one of the most successful athletes have in common is they do see these things as challenges instead of threats. And that sort of goes back to why we sort of started as athletes to play sport in the first place. So we enjoyed the competition, we enjoyed the whole atmosphere and the ideology of competing in these sports, and that's where our enjoyment comes from, and the challenge of that is where our enjoyment came from for these sports. So although it seems quite simple, I think it's something that a lot of young athletes don't do, especially with all the external pressures we put on them as people in the industry. If athletes are able to keep hold of that challenge appraisal and that sort of, I want to do well in this, and I see this as a challenge, I don't worry about the negative consequences of what happened, I think that sort of splits the difference of athletes who can go really far and athletes who maybe will struggle with this move over to America. So that'd be the one thing I'd say for athletes to focus on. See it as a challenge, see it as an enjoyment, and remember why they were playing or competing in sport in the first place.
Yeah.
And that will take it.
Absolutely. And the one tip that I can always give as a former professional as well is to separate yourself from that athlete and not to, depend on performances basically too much. So what I'm trying to say is that if you lose a game or you come second, yes, you can be upset and disappointed, but don't let that consume you wholeheartedly and affect you in a real negative way. That's the only advice that I can give, because it can be really challenging as well, in that sense that, if you are in an environment where you're not familiar with and you're still adapting, and then you sort of are all consumed by your sport and you lose a game, that can really affect someone negatively. And it's important to be able to separate yourself from that identity and still remember who you are as a person and what you stand for as well. And I think this is where George can really come in and help young athletes and for anyone who's listening, understand a little bit more about who they are, what they stand for, their values, and those sort of characteristics that make us who we are. So thank you very much for your time, George. For anyone who is listening and watching here, if you do want to get in touch with George and you do have any questions about sports psychology, then you can just DM us directly. If they want to get in touch with you directly, George, do you have an Instagram or an email that they can reach out to you on?
My email we can probably put in the description, I think, below. But with Instagram, I think it's easier to contact me on Twitter if you have it. If not, Instagram would be the best form of getting there. So I think it's G Franklin Performance is the @ on Twitter, but we'll put it all in the description for them to see if they have any questions. And I welcome any questions they have, because this is why I got involved in. I love talking about this sort of thing. I love sort of promoting the importance of sports psychology, but especially for young athletes going through it.
Absolutely, it's so important. And for anyone, again, who's listening, any UK athletes that sign up with us, they are eligible for 2 free sports psychology sessions with George, and then to continue those further at a reduced, really, really good rate. And my advice is for anyone who is considering going to the US to have some support in place. Obviously, we at Athletes USA do that to the best of our ability, but we're not experts like George. So one of the additional features that we offer in terms of working with us is that support that we offer through George. And that's it really from our end. Hopefully this interview is useful for anyone. It's been a bit of an idea into sports psychology if you weren't familiar with it. And again, I would encourage anyone to look a little bit further into what sports psychology can do for you as a person and as an athlete. So thank you very much for tuning in, George. Thank you for your time. And yeah,
thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone.